All right, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back to the Adventist History Podcast. This is your January 2022 bonus episode, and I'm going to take a break from our normal history adventures, talk about where this podcast is going. What is our plan for 2022 and beyond? Stay tuned, and you're going to find out. I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking about our 100th episode back in October. Being able to sit down, so to speak, with George Knight, Jeffrey Rosario, Greg Howell, and all the rest was a blast. I really enjoyed that episode. It felt crazy dropping a 4-hour episode on you guys. But, you get through it, right? However it is you listen to it all at once while you mow the grass, in chunks. It's fascinating to go through something like that and just hear from all these people back to back to back. I have so many questions I want to ask all of them. They're great people. There's so much to learn there. And if you asked me who I would want to be stuck on a deserted island with, well, I would have to tell you absolutely none of them, because I don't think any of them know how to build a boat. Okay, but there is a lot of wisdom in some of the things that needs to get out to people. And that's what we've been trying to do with this podcast. I do some research for each episode, but it would take me a lifetime to get to where George Knight is, okay? So I translate. They do the work, I read it, try to make their ideas accessible to more people. And that's what we've been doing in this podcast so far. But this is the year. This is the year that we're going to take another step forward. This podcast was intended to be a resource. Now, it's a platform upon which we can make more resources. The vision has been clarified, and it's simple. I think every Adventist should have a working knowledge of Adventist history. And if I could add to that, I think it's good if non-Adventists have a working knowledge of Adventist history too, because I could name a dozen reasons why it's good for people to be religiously literate, especially about religious minorities, but that's a conversation for another day, okay? So if you're not an Adventist and you've been listening to this, I still want you with us, okay? There's still a place for you here, but fundamentally, Adventist history is going to attract Adventists, and I think that every Adventist should have a working knowledge of Adventist history. Now, a working knowledge doesn't mean that you're an expert in a subject, okay? This isn't a situation of like, I need you to memorize these dates and names and places in order to pass some kind of test. Doesn't mean you need to be writing papers and all of these sort of things. It just means that you have enough proficiency that you can work with it, that you can handle it, okay? If I ask, do you have a working knowledge of this firearm? I think that means something like, you know generally how to load it, like you could figure that out. You know not to point it at people. You know how to pull a trigger, all those sort of things. If I ask if you have a working knowledge of piloting airplanes, I'm asking whether you know how to safely get it in the air, navigate to where you want to go, and then land it again. I'm not asking whether you can do stunts or fly passengers in a 747 or shoot down an enemy airplane, okay? A working knowledge in that case just means you can fly safely. Now, the phrase also implies that you have a knowledge that works, that's practical, that's useful, that helps you make informed decisions. Why is a working knowledge important with Adventist history right now? Because Adventist identity is rooted in its history in the past, and as we all make decisions about what it means to be an Adventist in 2022, it's helpful to know what our past actually is. Adventist history isn't who did what and when. This isn't a college class. This is information for living. This isn't about being controlled by our past, right? Like, well, we have to do everything that was done in the past. It's just about being informed by it. I have this friend in Australia, Peter, and he says that when he recommends this podcast to people, he tells them, it's not as boring as it sounds. Thanks, buddy, I think. But what he's getting at is that, I'm here to tell a story. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not here to test you and give you a grade afterwards. I'm not here to bash traditional Adventists, nor urge you to become one. I am here to tell you a story because I think once you know this story, you will better understand yourself and those around you who are Adventists. Now, what you do with that story is up to you, but I sincerely hope it makes you a more well-rounded, deeper Seventh-day Adventist Christian, whatever that looks like for you, okay? But if you're not an Adventist, hey, again, I'm not here to try to convert you. This is not an evangelistic effort here. But hang around for the history, right? Learn more about your religious neighbors. I'm totally cool with that. So anyways, I hope that you are all getting a working knowledge of Adventist history through this podcast. That's the vision. And in order for us to realize that vision, this has to become more than a podcast. We're over 100 episodes in now. Do you realize that? Do you know what people tell me? Hey, I'm not caught up, but I'm getting there, I promise. Like people I run into sometimes have this feeling of guilt that they aren't listening to these episodes the moment that they get released. Like it's like a weird thing sometimes between us. And let me just tell you, it's okay. Okay, that doesn't make anyone a bad friend. We're all busy. 100+ episodes is a lot for someone to catch up on. Assuming the average episode is 35 minutes, let's say, that's 61 hours of content. Do you know how long it takes to listen to the Bible? About 72 hours. So let's just say by the time this podcast reaches the end of our story, we'll probably be close to 100 hours in. 100 hours of audio, longer than the Bible. Yeah. Let's just say that the podcast is a great way for some people to get a working knowledge of Adventist history. But maybe it's not for everyone. And maybe this is far too much content to reasonably expect some people to digest, okay? A working knowledge of Adventist history shouldn't mean go listen to this thing for 100 hours. That's a little bit much. So this is the year we're going to branch out. And look, I can't promise we're going to hit the target perfectly on all of these projects all the time. You know how things go, but this is the goal. Okay, so first, we're going to print and publish some stuff this year, which I know seems kind of funny because, this podcast has always been about being on new media. We have our episodes on YouTube, of course, and I'm really interested in what YouTube does in the podcasting space this year. They've hired somebody to deal with podcasting on YouTube, so, keep watching that. Maybe they're going to make it easier to just, podcasting won't just be a video that you upload. Maybe they'll have some kind of new features and stuff to make it cooler. Right, but we're on YouTube, and obviously we're here in your ear in whatever podcasting app you're listening from. But the idea of going back to books is like, isn't that what we left behind? Well, I mean, no. I remember the first time I saw an Amazon store in the mall, and you're like, wait, what? I mean, isn't that what Amazon was built to kind of not do? Did they close all these mom and pop bookstores and then go make their own bookstores? Well, that's just the kind of funny thing, right? People still go to malls. People still shop. People still read books. I read a ton of books to do this podcast, so I love books. And if we can print some materials for people, and of course we're going to do it with some sweet layout design, and we're going to do it hopefully with with audiobooks where that makes sense, or with ebooks as well. But yeah, we're going to go back into the print space this year. And one of those projects is going to be some small group material going through Adventist history. It's going to be 13 weeks, if that's how you want to look at it, 13 meetings, 13 whatever, that your small group or your church at prayer meeting, or you can just read on your own. You can just go through it. Boom. Through Adventist history. That'll give you a working knowledge of Adventist history. Then at the end of the year, we're going to release a devotional kind of book. Never really know what to call these things, but it's basically like 31 days of reflections going through the Christmas season and into New Year's. It isn't just going to be Ellen White. It's not going to be a compilation of what Ellen White said about these things. It's going to be a collection of thoughts on themes of the Advent and New Year. Some of them are going to be very provocative, and they're going to be from all sorts of people in Adventist history, from the very, very beginning to more recent people in Adventist history. I don't always like using the word devotional because devotionals often give this feeling of like, I don't know, every day it just kind of gives you an often pleasant, encouraging thing to think about. And sometimes we need that, of course, and sometimes we need provocative things to think about. I think about what we covered in our Christmas bonus episode with Ellen White, saying, there's too much selfishness at Christmas. And it's like, that's not a thought we should just let go. I think that's a thought we should dwell on a little bit and respond to, at least in our own lives, unless we're okay with selfishness, in which case, I can't help you there. But, so some of it is going to be encouraging stuff, reflections on the birth of Jesus and all that. But some of it's going to be kind of challenging to us. And the whole point is to provoke growth in people, to live and to think Adventistly. I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but really, like, what does it mean to approach economics from an Adventist perspective, or medicine, or the law? Obviously, we're not going to cover all of that in this book, but it's a burden I have to flesh out. What does it mean to be a thinking, breathing Adventist on issues other than doctrine or diet? Anyway, that's a little taste of what that's going to be like. Obviously, we're a little ways away from that now, and that'll take shape as as time goes on. But yeah, that's the publishing stuff. Hopefully, we can publish other materials in Adventist history in the months and years ahead as well. It's not going to end with these things, but I'd like to do one of those quote unquote devotional things every year until, people have a lot of stuff to reflect on. Any month of the year, I guess is what I mean. They can just pick up one of the 12 someday, one of the 12 reflection books, whatever you want to call them. I gotta really work on the branding of that, don't I? But that's what we're going to be publishing this year in terms of print. And I don't know what is happening with Adventist publishing here in the States right now. It's kind of a mess. So I'm thinking these things will be self-published on behalf of the podcast. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. If you're a printer or a publisher and you want to make your case, go for it. Love to work with you. However, the big project I want to work on this year is an online course in Adventist history. Online courses are just super popular, and this is going to be a super course on Adventist history. It will be fun. It will be historically accurate. I will do my best to maintain the voice of this podcast, and not in terms of audio necessarily, but in terms of just like, let's have a little bit of fun with it, as we go. It will be, it'll be fun. It'll be historically accurate. It'll be broken into 3 parts. That's what I'm thinking right now. The first part of the course will go through Adventist history chronologically until Ellen White dies, which is basically the scope of season 1 of this podcast. And then the second part of the course will be topical. Let's talk about Adventist history and gender. Let's talk about Adventist history and politics and how they related to some of the governments that the Adventists had to live under. And then, of course, the third part of the course will be focused on how we can reason from Adventist history. So, for instance, we'll talk about 1888, and then we'll sit down and say, all right, what does that mean for me? What can I do with this history today? Like, what can I learn from it? I think we got to provoke some discussions out of the stuff that we talk about, and not just say, well, that's it for this episode, got to go. And so that's what part 3 of that online course on Adventist history will be about. Now, this is not all going to be launching at once. That's all. As you can imagine, these 3 parts, that's a lot of videos. In terms of length, it's hard to say. I was thinking the first part, the chronological journey through Adventist history might be, I don't know, some 20-minute episodes each, maybe 15 of them or so. So, I don't know. I think that, that's about right. I don't want to overdo it. This is kind of a 101, a survey course. It should be shorter than this podcast. But I think the real value is definitely going to be in parts 2 and 3 when we talk about the themes in Adventist history, because that's something we haven't been able to do very well in this podcast, because we're doing this story chronologically. So, for instance, we don't have an episode on how did Adventist diet change from 1860 to 1960, right? because we just kind of deal with an issue at a time, not an issue, but a year at a time, or an event at a time, or whatever. So I'm really looking forward to dealing thematically with Adventist history, and you can really find trends that way. You can see how things change that way, and I'm interested in part 3 as well. Like, how do we apply Adventist history? How does this help us to think as Adventists? So whatever problem or whatever field we're in life, how do we apply that Adventist thinking? Now I'm going to bring up the Jesuits because that's always a fun topic to bring up in an Adventist History podcast. But I'm going to bring them up because, there's an understanding out there that there's a Jesuit way of thinking, a Jesuit rationality that they bring to whatever problem that they face. And I think that I'm interested in the question of whether there's an Adventist mentality, an Adventist spirituality, an Adventist way of thinking about things. Because, we're very focused on the second advent of Jesus, of course, and we're very focused on this idea, historically, of restorationism, like we're trying to restore ideas and truths and doctrines that were lost. And how do those help us think about problems? I'm just riffing here, okay? When you realize that some people put all this hope in politics to solve world problems, and obviously there's a place for that. But Adventists who are always looking for the second coming of Jesus are not going to place all of their hopes in our political leaders solving all of our problems. So, how does that commitment to both being present here in the world, here and now, and that commitment towards transcendence of the world to come, how does the tension between those two ideas help us to maybe keep a good perspective as we deal with political questions? Anyways, things like that. I'm not going to be the one going through all of those things, but I'll be very happy to interview different Adventists who have great insight into some of these questions. So, anyways, like I said, this is going to be a long super course on Adventist history. It will not all come out at once. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about this until like 2025. So what's going to happen, I'm guessing, is I'm going to work on that first part, just narrating through Adventist history, and just release it maybe a video at a time. And, then we'll go on to part 2, and then we'll go on to part 3, and it'll just kind of be built over time. And you guys will have an opportunity to join while it's being built. And that's the beauty of online courses, because, it's not a book. When a book comes out, the book is there. It's permanent. It's in print. You can't really mess with it. Can't really change it. So new discoveries are made, new insights are had, but they don't often justify a second or a third edition of a book. So it could be 20 years out of date, but it's just financially, it makes no sense to reprint the thing to make it more accurate. But, yeah, I think that online courses are better because, if I do a video on, abolition, let's say, in the in the Civil War era, and, somebody discovers something or has some insight on something, I can just go re-record that one video, and boom, you have the most up-to-date information. Do it like the day of the result, the new information being published. You can just quickly run back into the studio, film it. I'm not going to say it's going to be that quick, but you get the idea, right? Like, this thing can always be updated forever. If I'm out somewhere and I see George Knight, it's like, hey, man, let's go talk about something here. Boom, I can just add that video. So maybe we talk about abolition in one of the episodes. I can just add like a little sub-video. Here's a 5-minute conversation with George Knight about the Underground Railroad. You're never going to have a 5-minute conversation with George Knight, but you get the idea, right? You get the idea. Like, you can just always keep adding to this thing and just keep adding value. So it's going to be under construction. Starting this year is probably when it'll come out, maybe summer, maybe fall. And, it won't be a whole lot. It won't be complete at first, but it's going to get there. And that's really what gets me excited. So the idea is that if you go through the first part of that course, you're going to have a working knowledge of Adventist history. If you go through the whole thing, I don't know what you call that. You're going to have an even more working knowledge of Adventist History. That would be the ideal for people. That would be the ideal. But someday I hope to do other online courses that offer deeper dives into aspects of Adventist history, like, hey, let's do a play-by-play on the Millerite movement. Like, let's do a 6-hour course on the Millerite movement. Let me show you documents. Let me show you newspapers. You guys realize I only live like 2 hours away from where some of these Millerite primary sources are, and I was trying to get there before COVID, and I had the date scheduled and everything. I think it was March of 2020. I was supposed to go there. And then they're like, yeah, Matthew, COVID, check back later. Here we are, almost 2 years later. Still haven't gone. But anyways, like that would be really interesting to me, right? Talk about the Millerite movement. Let me show you some of this stuff. Some of these primary sources. You can read it for yourself. Maybe we just spend 6 hours. We go through it month by month throughout the Millerite movement. Or maybe we can go in depth about how Ellen White wrote her books. Where did the idea for the Great Controversy start, in the late 1850s? How did it end up in this version in 1911? And how does that version differ when published around the world? Right? Sometimes a chapter gets added in different cultures. So let's talk about that. What did her drafts look like, if we can find out? What did that first draft look like compared to what eventually got printed? To do some of these deep dives in these other subjects. That's what I'm getting at here. There's so much room to grow in this direction beyond merely offering folks a working knowledge of Adventist history. Offering them a working knowledge is the vision. Okay, that's like the minimum of what we want to accomplish. But, of course we want to go deeper than that as well. We spend a lot of hours here together. There's a lot we don't talk about. We spent 2 episodes, I think, on 1888. You know how much time we could have spent there? A lot. We could have gone a lot deeper into that. So I hope we can offer some of this deeper stuff for those who want to know more about specific periods in Adventist history. We could offer those courses too as time goes on. Anyways, we are making resources this year, both in print and with this online class, in service of this vision to help everyone have a working knowledge of Adventist history. And the hope is that you don't need to follow some prescribed path to obtain that. Someone wants to listen to 65 hours of this podcast, as it is right now, to get that working knowledge of Adventist history, go for it. Go for it. You can do that. If you want to read books, well, we hope to have printed materials out that can do that as well. If you want to take the online course, yeah, do that. That's a good way to do it too. The important thing is that people understand that the story they are a part of, that you're living Adventist history. So don't just understand it, but realize that you are making Adventist history each and every day. That's why it's so important that we understand this thing that we are all tangled up in as Adventists. So that's the roadmap for this year. There's a number of smaller things too, right? Over Christmas, I wrote on the blog on our website about Adventist Christmas dinners and what they ate. I also published a post, just yesterday, about how some Adventists supported the KKK based on Michael Campbell's research. I added some new t-shirts to the store, and there's plenty more of those coming. A cool thing about our new website is that we can offer free digital downloads as well. So at some point, not just free, but paid, of course, as well. So at some point, I might just say, hey, if you want to go read so-and-so's paper, just go to the website and download it. Or maybe I can offer a PDF of something I wrote or whatever. So we have more coming for you this year beyond the 2 big projects, some of which isn't quite worthy of a headline. So just know there's a lot coming this year. Now, if you're on board with this direction that we're headed in, I hope you'll consider joining one of our orders on Patreon. For a little less than $1 a month, you can join the Order of the Haystack and support what we're doing. Writing and filming and editing online courses, research books, all of this relies upon your support. And as I travel to speak and do research, I try to let the patrons know where I'm heading and when, and we can meet up and chat. And that's always fun. I really enjoy those lunches and dinners. And just hearing, how people from different cultures and different backgrounds and different perspectives, why they listen. And we just chat. We chat about that and we chat about other things. So that's always fun. I also just updated all the tiers on Patreon with new rewards. So maybe give it a look if it's been a while. The new order of John Andrews for $10 a month will get you a lapel pin, which is, I'm waiting for them to be shipped to me. I'm excited about those. And you get a discount at the store. The Order of Joseph Bates will get you a signed copy of one of our episode scripts, which is cool. It's a new thing we're offering. Or you can join the big Order of James White at $50 a month. You can get some signed copies of Michael Campbell's latest book, plus a lot more. There's a lot there. It's just as a way of saying thank you guys for your support. Of course, you can also just go buy some shirts in the store as well. That helps. Or even if you just have a little free time and you like to research, well, let me know on the website. Hey, I've got an hour a month. Can I help with anything? Or maybe we can help you, for your time, compensate you in some way. We can, if you're willing to volunteer or you're willing to work a little bit, hey, we'd love to have you. Can always use the help. When I was showing these updated tiers on Facebook, someone commented and said, well, why do we have to pay to learn Adventist history? And look, I want to make this really clear. You don't. Not at all. If you just want to listen here for free, that's totally cool with me. You are very welcome here. All right? And if you wouldn't mind leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to it, that'd be a big help too, because it helps others find this podcast as well. But you don't have to pay anything. It's not going to be about that, okay? This is a personal thing, but I want it to be made clear. I do not in any way personally benefit from this podcast. I don't. Any donations we may get, whatever Patreon stuff that we get, or people buy shirts or whatever it may be, it just stays with the podcast, and it's used to go research. It's used to buy books that I need to study. It'll be used to film the online course and all these sort of things. It's not for me personally. I don't get anything out of this, like that. I'm not driving around the Tesla here because of this podcast by a long stretch, okay? When I invite you to support the podcast, I'm not inviting you to support me. I'm inviting you to support the podcast, and that's where it stays, all right? I suppose the last thing I want to say is that with this thing going beyond being a podcast, we might have to kind of adjust our branding a little bit. Maybe we'll call the overarching organization the Adventist History Project, of which the podcast is one piece. Of course, it'll always be the Adventist History Podcast, but, it'll be part of this Adventist History Project, which printing is one part and podcasting is one part. Anyways, I'm thinking about that. All right, it's time for me to go. Yeah, let me just say that I appreciate you all, even though I haven't met most of you. I am eternally humbled by what this podcast has become. I would have been done years ago if you all hadn't intervened and been like, hey, keep going. So just understand, from the bottom of my heart, I really love and appreciate all of you, even though I haven't met most of you. Just because you listen, just because you care, just because you share this passion that I have for understanding Adventist history. And man, that just endears you all to me. I appreciate you very much for listening. Thanks so much. I will see you guys in a couple weeks when we talk about the creation of the Adventist Bible Commentary. Woohoo! Can't wait. We'll see you there.